A Quiet Place Day One is directed by Michael Sarnoski and stars Lupita Nyong'o and Joseph Quinn in a prequel to the Quiet Place franchise, A Quiet Place 1 and 2. I've got lots of thoughts on this film, and I'll dive into that shortly, but in terms of the synopsis, when New York City comes under attack from an alien invasion, a woman and other survivors try to find a way to safety. They soon learn that they must remain absolutely silent as the mysterious creatures are drawn to the slightest sound. Now, frankly, that synopsis could apply to any of the films in the franchise. And I'll be really honest off the bat, I've never been a massive fan of the franchise. It's fine. It's not a bad film by any chance. I just found the original to be quite a sort of glossy Hollywood film. And I think there are things that kind of were set up in that original movie that I didn't quite buy into. But that said, it's not a bad film. It's well acted. There were just a few contrivances in it that made it less kind of fun for me. So let's talk about how I feel about Day One. And actually, I would say this is my favourite one of the franchise so far. It's definitely the most kind of emotionally affecting, and I'll talk about that kind of as we go through it. I will say it's one of those films that takes a while to get going. And it depends what you like out of movies. I'll obviously talk about, why I kind of preferred the second half of the film. But I guess my reasons for that, sort of my feelings on that first half an hour was it felt quite generic actually at start. It had that kind of very stereotypical apocalyptic film in New York. We've seen it a lot where, everyone's going about their daily lives and then there are signs that something's happening and then it all suddenly really escalates and cars are thrown and there are explosions and blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of the part of the film that I thought was fine. I like the setup, and in terms of spoilers, Lupita Nyong'o's character is undergoing sort of, kind of palliative care at this point, and she's kind of seriously ill. So in terms of setup, that's different. That's kind of nice and interesting. But I think it kind of takes its while to set up what we kind of already know. If you've seen the franchise, you kind of know, like, the characters are figuring out very slowly that these monsters, these aliens, whatever they are reacting to sound, and it kind of takes them a little bit of time to think that through. And I think the film didn't do too much to kind of hit us over the head with the kind of the plot of the film. It kind of relied on the fact that we'd already seen the first two, but again, it kind of felt like it had to go through the motions a little bit to get to where we were. So let's continue with some of the negatives, because actually I really like this film and I want to talk about the good stuff. What I will say is it's one of those films, and again, it's like the original, that it kind of has those sort of contrivances that sort of move the plot along a bit. And I would say my issue with the sort of the scare factor of all of them is there's just very little peril, because, how do I say it? It doesn't always feel like the rules of the film are very well established. So sometimes characters will make noises that I would say are quite loud and then nothing happens. Sometimes they make the quietest noise and then you've got monsters all over them. It never quite felt like there was a consistency. And hey, maybe that's fine. Maybe films can be messy and, things don't have to kind of always go in that same way. I just felt that the film kind of decided as and when the rules applied and when they didn't. And that kind of tended to take me out of it. There were times when, for example, the sound designer felt cheated. So there were times when, you'd get, there was a stream of the whole crowd of people walking en masse, almost making no noise. And it's like, well, their feet on the ground would make a sound. And then a character will open a tin of cat food and it's the loudest thing ever and they have to cover it up with a jumper. So that kind of took me out of it. And and also there were certain moments in the film which felt like, let's have an action sequence here, and the reason for that action sequence wasn't always a great payoff, because it felt a bit like the characters were doing it to give us something exciting to watch rather than an organic decision that they were going to make. So I could say those are my negatives to the film. I think what's interesting is, because I love horror and I love kind of spectacle, I think what's great about this film, and it kicks in about halfway through, is one, those sort of generic action sequences really start to dial back, and it becomes much more about the characters. And normally in horror films, the biggest criticism of horror films is that there's no character development, you don't really care. And yes, it takes a while to care, but I think once you do, I actually found this film really affecting. And I didn't expect that, because I thought, A Quiet Place Part 1, there was a big emotional scene. It just didn't do much for me. And I think part of that is down to the performances of the two main actors, who I just thought really sold it. I thought the relationship was unusual. How they kind of ended up being thrown together wasn't what you'd normally find in these kinds of films. It was kind of oddly vulnerable in a way. They both kind of needed each other in quite a sweet way. And I think it was about that kind of caring about the characters really sold that second half for me. I will also say there's a cat in this film that, I'm not even joking, this cat was a character in itself. It made it more emotional. The cat was a phenomenal actor. I don't know how you get cats to act, because the cats that I've always had in my life haven't got any interest in doing anything you tell them. But this cat, again, just brought something else. You don't see that very often, where an animal actually becomes quite a pivotal character in the film. And by the end, I was with Chris, my partner, and we were just sort of, wincing, thinking, oh, please let that cat be okay. So, I say I'm absolutely not joking on that. I think the cat was phenomenal. I feel like the cat would have made it so much harder to film, because it must have just made everything difficult. That cat got plunged into water 2 or 3 times throughout the film. It goes through all these other kind of reasonably awful scenarios, and it just looks so chilled and so calm. And it's such a warm and likable character that really kind of weaves the other 2 characters together in some way. And it has a big payoff in the ending. And I'm not going to spoil the ending, because I don't need to. So, again, if you're looking for a loud, banging, like, scare fest, maybe you're going to prefer the first half of this film and you're going to be disappointed by the ending. I found the exact opposite, that I felt like I was sort of looking at my watch a little bit in that first hour, thinking, oh, this is quite generic. It's kind of, where's this going? And then actually ended up being actually something that really, really touched me. And there's a particular scene near the end of the film where, it really did kind of make me choke up a little bit. And I did not go into a Quiet Place movie expecting that to happen. I thought just some of the character choices were really brave. I thought the ending was really, again, it wasn't a nice fluffy Hollywood ending. In some ways, maybe it was. But it just did something that I thought just felt a lot more authentic. And it turned the hopelessness of a sort of apocalyptic situation, and kind of the hopelessness of Lupita's character, into something actually quite optimistic in a weird way. And you'll know what I'm talking about when you see it, but I thought it was a really kind of beautiful ending, and actually ended on a really nice note. So, I actually quite liked it. I think one thing that was also quite good, I kind of thought the film was quite bland looking. It's not a film that I'm going to think like, wow, the cinematography was great. What I did think was interesting, though, was when we looked in the credits, most of it was filmed in the UK, and a big chunk of it was filmed on an aerodrome in the UK somewhere. So I don't think much of it was filmed on location in New York, but it had a real authentic New Yorkishness about it. I do just think that maybe New York's been overdone in terms of apocalyptic movies. We've seen that kind of landscape so many times before. It's fine. I don't think it would have made a difference to the story either way where it was set. But for me, this was a really character-led, dialogue-led, emotional movie. And actually the horror was the weakest part for me. I didn't really care about the deaths. I knew they were going to be quite generic. I think the creatures are fine, but we've seen enough of them, and you've seen so much of them out of the light in the other films that there's no mystery there. So in a way, maybe they couldn't rely on the scares. And actually, there's a couple of little cheap jump scares, and as I said, there's a couple of quite unnecessary action scenes that don't add a lot. So you've really got to home in on these 2 people just in this awful situation, just looking out for each other and helping that damn cat, who I absolutely loved. So I'll keep this nice and short. This was a solid 7 for me. I really enjoyed it. My partner Chris wasn't as sold. I think he found that first hour a bit of a slog. And I think a lot of you might think, well, actually, that detracts a little bit. I think in a way that build-up was really helpful, and by the end of it, I really came to care. So do go check it out. I really enjoyed it. And finally, we get a film first. So this was released in the UK tonight, and it's out in the rest of the world tomorrow. So you're getting my review early. But go see it, go check it out. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoy the film, and I'll see you in the next one.